Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Nordic Climate Action Weeks here in Stockholm and to the Nordic Pavilion in Madrid at the UN climate negotiations, the COP25. My name is Stian Fjelldal, and before I put you over to Madrid, I will just say to our audience here that we will open up for questions in the end. So if you have some questions or you want to ask some questions, just think about it now and we will get them in to the conversation. But now I will say, like they do in good old-fashioned television, over to Madrid.
Thank you very much, Stian. And here we are ready for a daily briefing from the Madrid negotiation at COP25. And I also want to say to everybody a warm welcome to those who are in Stockholm, and a warm welcome to our small but very active audience here in Madrid. And also, of course, a warm welcome to our viewers and listeners on the internet, because this is live streamed on the net. Today we continue our series of daily briefings, as I said, from the negotiations in Madrid. And I'm so happy to introduce my young friend beside me, Egilsdóttir from Iceland. And Abby is a youth delegate in the Icelandic delegation here at COP25. Very welcome to you, Abby. And my name is Mats Lindqvist. I am a communication advisor at the Nordic Council of Ministers, and I am the moderator here in Madrid, obviously. And as Stian said, remember, this is supposed to be a dialogue between Stockholm and Madrid, so we will open for questions in the end of the session. And please, if you are on social media, please use our hashtag Nordic Climate Action. And that's that. Now back to Abby. You have today participated, or you were at least present at the COP negotiations. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience from today and your participation?
Yeah, I was partly present at the pre-2020 ambition and it's like a pre-2020 stocktake, where it was like a technical meeting where they were going over kind of what had been done and if it had been enough. And so there was like a panel of a few experts, and they shared what had been going on, and then there were the countries could talk. And it was really interesting because, at least what I heard, I was there for 1 hour, but it was 3 hours in total. The countries that spoke sounded very happy with themselves. They kind of sounded like they had been doing well. But when we look at the data, we can see that the governments of the world have not been doing enough. And that was pointed out at the end, just before I left. A few NGOs spoke up and had prepared statements about the pre-2020 stocktake and encourage the world's leaders to take real action now. Because what we didn't do before 2020, we still have to do it after 2020. We can't just skip it. We still have to do it. So that was interesting. But yeah, I also went to more events today, so I couldn't, I didn't follow up the negotiations all day.
But when you say that the countries sounded very, very pleased with themselves, what kind of thoughts do you have when you listen to that?
kind of makes me feel like they haven't been listening to youth. They haven't been listening to the scientists. They're not hearing us. They're not hearing our calls for increased action, or not just only increased action, for any action at all. Because our global emissions are still increasing year by year. And that's a huge problem, and they need to be decreasing by, 7.6% for the next 10 years, a year.
Yeah, but does that mean when you look at the world now and you look at the young people, you see massive climate movement among the youth?
Yeah.
Do you feel that even though you are millions and millions all over the world, that your message hasn't gone through to the decision makers of the world?
I feel like they tell us that they hear us. They tell us that they want to change and they want to do the changes, but I haven't seen the change. I haven't seen the action that they've promised us for years. And I haven't seen the action for the last year either, since Greta started her climate strikes. So yeah, they say that they hear us, but I'm not seeing it. So words I hear, but I don't see the actions.
How does that make you feel?
Angry, most of all, and disappointed as well, because I have been expecting a lot since I started thinking about climate change. I've always been expecting more and more, but my expectations always fail. So
it sounds a little bit desperate. Do you feel that there's nothing to do, or should you just give up?
No, definitely not. There's a lot we can do. We have the solutions, we're just not using them. We have the money, we have the solutions, we just have to implement them and put the money where it should go. Stop drilling for oil, stop giving money to fossil fuel companies, stop driving so much and flying so much, and just stop this ridiculous consumption that's been going on for the last, 50 years, and it's only increasing. We have all of the actions and we can do something about it, but it's going to be difficult. And it's going to be difficult because we have waited for so long. So if we would have started in 1992 after the conference in Rio, then we would probably be almost okay right now. Like, we could just continue what we've been doing, but we didn't start then. So we need some drastic action now.
But do you continue? Do you as the young people, do you have the strength to go on and demonstrate and have these massive protests, even though, as you say, it's really hard to get a real impact? You can see that they listen, you can see that they talk about it, but the action is maybe not there yet. Do you still have the strength to go on?
I feel like I have to, because I'm not sure what I would do if I would give up. And just for my own sake, for my own health, I need to continue. And even though it's sometimes disappointing, or often disappointing, it's better to try to do something, to try to make the change, than to do nothing.
If we go back to the Icelandic delegation,
Yes.
which this is the first time that they have a youth delegate, if I understood it correctly.
Yes, we've had youth representatives before, but never like as a part of the delegation.
Yeah. What is? Can you tell us a little bit about your role in as a youth delegate in delegation? What do you do?
I'm still figuring that out a little bit, but so I can't sit in on negotiations. I can't speak on behalf of Iceland or the Icelandic delegation, but I can talk to the other people in the Icelandic delegation and try to affect what they bring to the table. And then, of course, just by being here at COP, I can also affect decisions, for example, that Youngo makes and their work, and I can try to affect other people by asking questions, by talking to them, and just by being present. So even though I'm not allowed to speak up in the negotiations, I feel like there's many other places where I can try to be vocal and show my ambition and try to have effect there.
Now I understand that the Icelandic delegation is quite small.
Yes.
Do you feel that you, in that small group, have, do you there feel that you have an impact, that they listen to you really, I mean, really seriously, not just, you're not
I
there
believe
just
that they listen to me, yeah. But at the same time, they're only 2 people, and it's not possible for 2 people to like have overview of everything that's going on here, because there's always, I think, at least like 3 or 4 negotiation meetings happening at the same time, from almost like from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. or something. So it's way too much work for 2 people. So I can affect them, but it's just, they're not many enough. Like, they're doing all they can, but it's not going to be enough because we need more people.
Do they, as we sit in a Nordic pavilion, I think it's good to ask, do they have any Nordic cooperation at the COP with the other Nordics? So there would be a little bit bigger group.
I know that they're mostly a part of the umbrella group, which Norway is also in. But of course, it's mostly like, yeah, Iceland and Norway and other countries in the umbrella group. And then, of course, the other Nordic countries are in the EU, and they negotiate through the EU. So, of course, like, we have Nordic cooperation, like a lot of it. And of course, because of the Nordic prime ministers have said that they want us to be the most sustainable region in the world. So to reach that, we must have cooperation between the Nordic countries. Yeah,
we see also, and we also always say that the Nordic countries have very ambitious plans for the climate, working very much for the climate, against the climate change.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with the Nordic work, or would you do something different?
I'm not satisfied. Of course, I know the Icelandic plan better than the other countries' plans, but what I know of them, it's not enough. It's not enough to be leaders in the battle against climate change. We need more action. We need bigger promises, and we need them to follow up on those promises, because at least what they're planning to do back home now is not coming close to being what we need. And the Nordic countries are some of the richest countries in the world, and we're supposed to help other poorer countries battle climate change from their own perspective as well. So we need to do more than we've ever said that we're going to do. And I don't think that we're doing enough, at least not now, but hopefully soon.
Yeah, I just have to point out that we have another hashtag than the Nordic Climate Action, which is Nordic Solution, which means that we know the Nordic countries try to show the rest of the world that we are quite good at this. Isn't this a really quite good way to do it? Or?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I know that there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the Nordic countries that have a lot of solutions that can work in many countries all over the world. And that's really good. And it's good that they're trying to be leaders. I just wish they would do more, because I don't feel like, of course, everything helps, but we need a lot more.
Back to the COP25, what are your expectations from these 2 weeks?
I'm hoping that there will be a good, what's the word?
Say it in Danish or Icelandic. Say it in Icelandic and we'll
something good. Wow.
Results.
Yeah, good results from the Article 6 negotiations. That we will have results that will work towards to make the Paris Agreement really work. Because of course, Article 6 is really important for the Paris Agreement.
Could you say what Article 6 is for maybe most of people know what it is, but
in my understanding, it's about how countries can work together towards their national or their NDCs. So what they're doing themselves and their goals.
National plans, yeah.
Yeah, and what I have sensed is that the battle in Article 6 is that some countries want to make the emissions reductions that they do together to be accounted for in both countries. But then we would be like counting those reductions twice, which doesn't make sense if we're actually trying to reach our goals of 1.5 degrees or less.
Are you optimistic about this Article 6?
I don't believe that the negotiations are far enough right now for me to be either pessimistic or optimistic. So I guess I'll just see in the next few days.
Yeah, we'll see.
Of course, I've heard that it's starting okay, but we still have many days left of the conference.
We have.
So
and let's be optimistic.
A lot could happen.
Well, meanwhile, I'll ask Stian in Stockholm if there's any questions there. Otherwise, we continue here. But what do you say?
Yes, are there any questions? Yeah, there's one here. Please state your name first and then your question.
Hi, my name is Jóna Þórey Pétursdóttir. Hi, Aðalbjörg. We actually know each other from University of Iceland. I'm from Iceland. I'm a keynote listener from Iceland. And I wanted to ask you, just because you spoke about the optimism and how everybody was really positive today at the pre-stock, because at an event today about corporate accountability, it was stated that we need to break the industry's and corporate systematic hold on our economy and the corporate hold on our politicians. And since you mentioned earlier that you felt everyone was very positive, was it your perception that people were simply speaking so positively to please someone like corporate, or speaking so positively to please youth or voters? Or how did you feel it was coming from?
Thank you. I don't believe, at least, that they were speaking positively to please the youth, because just afterwards the youth spoke up and said that they did not agree with what they just said. So I think it's to please a certain type of voters or certain kind of companies or people that have kind of a power over some governments in the world. So, but I definitely don't believe it was to please the youth. Maybe to please like a lot of other people, but not the youth.
But could it also be that the countries are holding their cards quite close to the chest in the start of the negotiations?
That might also be, of course. Maybe they're trying to start it off on a good foot and then try to bring the heat in later. But this is my first COP, but the way I would think that this should work is that you bring the heat in the beginning so that you can work it out throughout the conference. Because 2 weeks is not that long time for those many issues as we have here at the COP. So I don't really know.
We have another gentleman here. State your name, please, first.
Yeah. Uno Svedin, Stockholm Resilience Center. Following up on the youth track, Greta has, with regard to the youth role in these, constantly come back and back saying, I'm not producing solutions. That is the role of others. Yeah. Have you heard maybe something among your colleagues in the youth delegations that there might be ideas anyhow disregarding sort of Greta's position on characters of solutions that you feel would be important?
Of course, we know of many solutions, and there is a lot of entrepreneurship going on with youth now. I've noticed a lot of entrepreneurship over the last year that's from youth that's going towards a more sustainable future. But even though we can think up solutions, we need help from those in power to implement them. And because it's not enough to have the solutions, we also have to implement them. So even though we can tell you what the solutions are, and both from our perspective and also from the scientists that have told us what the solutions are for many, many years, then we need the adults, the people in charge, to implement those solutions so they can work. Did that answer the question? I hope so. Okay.
I think, Stian, that we have to turn back to Madrid if
That's okay.
It's okay with you.
That's okay.
Yeah, thanks. And are there any questions among this active audience here? Otherwise, I will give you one more, and I think I have time for one more question. Yes, I do.
Okay.
There is one question. Okay. The last question goes to the audience. That's great.
Hello, my name is Louis Akenji. I'm with SEED, which supports small and medium-sized enterprises across the Southern Hemisphere. I would start by disagreeing with you a little bit on your characterization that you're a very small delegation, because I do think in terms of numbers, it might not be that huge, but in terms of the moral significance globally, it is very big. And there's a lot of countries and delegations looking up to you to put forward proposals that are quite meaningful and to be frank, very honest to the current state of the planet. And the very straightforward question I have is, considering this in a sense a moral obligation, but in a sense the integrity you've brought to the negotiations so far, is there possibility of grouping up to form a coalition that is much stronger than individual countries to push forward these voices? Double counting in terms of Article 6, as you very much put forward, but as sort of a very low level of ambition that is being exhibited right now. Is there any chance that you can put forward a joint Nordic coalition to topple this low rolling ambition that we're sort of seeing here today?
I would love for that to happen, because I believe that if, of course, the Nordic prime ministers have sat together that they're going to be, like I said before, the most sustainable region in the world, and that they want to be leaders. And I think that if they would work maybe more together inside here, then they could probably be a strong voice in the negotiations. But I also think that there's a lot of like discrepancy between the like our prime minister in Iceland at the conference in the UN conference in in New York in August. She said that there was an emergency, a climate emergency. But then when us, me and Jona and others from the Fridays for Future back home, we confronted the ministers and asked them to declare an emergency, and we put forward a few ways to like a few actions to follow, like an action plan to follow with a declaration, and they were not ready to do that. So that's just one example of how I feel like there's words but not actions. So I think that we could be a strong united front, but I'm just not sure how much trust I have in my politicians to do that.
I think we have to wrap it up with those words, and then of course we hope that our politicians are so clever that they really do as Abby and the other young people want them to do. And with those words, I give over to Stian.
Thank you very much, Mats, and thank you, Abby. We are continuing in a couple of minutes, 7 minutes, 6:30. It's a new event. It's called Responsibly Sourced Building Materials as a Policy Instrument. And we hope our viewers on the internet also will continue watching.
Welcome back to Stockholm and the Norrsken House, and also welcome back to those of you who are watching us from somewhere else in the world and you who are in Madrid. I am now going to present for you our next program called Responsibly Sourced Building Materials as a Policy Instrument. And our first speaker will be opening the event this evening. He is called Mark Radka. He is representing UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme, and he is chief of the energy branch. Mark, the floor is all yours.
No, thank you very much. And a warm welcome to everybody here in the audience and our colleagues in Stockholm. So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to this event, and just to provide a little bit of context from the UN environment perspective on why we're gathered here this evening and what are we doing in this important area of responsibly sourced materials as a policy instrument. So we'll be talking today, and you'll hear from the guests or our speakers here in Madrid and in Stockholm about circularity in the built environment, and particularly the responsible sourcing of building materials and related policies, and how these relate to climate change. So we know that the building and construction industry, the sector, is the largest consumer of resources and raw materials in the economy. Between 1900 and 2010, the volume of natural resources used in buildings and construction and transport infrastructure increased by 23-fold. And currently, the sector consumes about 40% of total global raw materials used, and 800 billion tons of natural resources are embedded in the infrastructure we have today. All of this is or has consequences for the use of raw materials that generate greenhouse gas emissions, and of course the physical infrastructure that we live with determines in large part the emissions associated with buildings and construction. And these figures, alarming as they are in all sense projected to increase given demands in population and in economic growth, particularly in developing countries. One way of reducing the impact on the environment and society of resource consumption in the building and construction sector is to promote the use of responsibly sourced materials and to develop circularity in the supply chains where this is possible. And this includes promoting and applying circular economy approaches, the principles we in UNEP think very much about the reduce, reuse, and recycle triad for a pragmatic way of approaching reduction in material intensity, and including policies that cover construction waste, which is actually overlooked in many countries. Since 2015, the government of Finland and UNEP have joined forces with many others to promote these approaches in champion Sustainable Development Goal 12 on the on sustainable consumption and production patterns in the buildings and construction sector. We do so under the broad aegis of the One Planet Network, where the government of Finland is the lead and we are in a sense the co-lead. So today we have three excellent panelists here in Madrid. We have other speakers who will join us from Stockholm. And I would like to invite, I believe the choreography is I invite the first speaker who is here in Madrid, and that is Director Claude Loria from the Global Cement and Concrete Association. Could you join me up here? And I believe this is a foolproof device.
Good evening, everyone, Madrid. Good evening, Stockholm. So I will briefly explain our concrete responsible sourcing scheme. So maybe we can already have the next slide, please. Thank you. Coming up. So maybe while the slide is coming up. So the slides are changed from Stockholm, as far as I understand, not from here. So, well, for the sake of saving time, maybe I will start speaking. So the CSC is the Global Responsible Sourcing Certification Scheme for concrete. It's an independent voluntary scheme that has been designed to help the concrete, the cement, and the aggregate companies to obtain insight into the level of which they operate in terms of sustainability. I like to say it's a 360-degree assessment. So if we can move on the second slide, please. Thank you. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have the power control now. And so to help the companies to assess at which level of sustainability they operate, and it covers the environment, the social, and the economical aspect. But it's also there to allow, and we will see that later in the presentation, to enable informed decision in the construction value chain. So there you have a picture on how the CSC is developing in the world and who is involved in the CSC. But maybe to highlight, so you see here, I said 360-degree, and you see all the aspects against which the system rewards. So for each of these aspects, company can get points. So you have prerequisites, this is mandatory to have. Then you have management issues where you will, for example, see health and safety management is in there. You have the social aspects where you have labor practices, and then you have a rather big environmental assessment scheme where you have, because I know tonight is especially about circular economy, you see the E7 and E9 are about secondary raw materials, so it's part of the scheme. Then you also have the economical aspects with innovation being included, and then what is called the chain of custody, which means that where through the value chain you can account for the fact that the product has been responsibly sourced. Now, what makes the CSC concrete sustainable or more sustainable? And I'm aware of time, so I won't go through everything, but the main things are fair business practices and compliance, reducing CO2 emission. We are at COP here, so I think it's rather important. And you see the third bullet point is about public CO2 reduction targets and greenhouse gas monitoring in place for the companies. Then you have minimizing transport. You have a big part that relates to biodiversity, which we know also links to climate change. And then you have excellence in occupational health and safety. And then the last thing that is particularly relevant tonight is moving towards circularity and using water in a responsible way. And there you have the measure related to processing returned concrete, water scarcity assessment for the plant area, and water consumption monitored. That's for you to understand. So it's cement, concrete, aggregate. So cement is the glue that binds concrete together, that binds the aggregate together. And you see that everything is weighted in the scheme. So it's not only concrete, it's the whole value chain. And then at the end, there is a certificate for responsibly sourced. Very important is that the scheme is aligned with green building labels. So the scheme is already recognized by BREEAM, DGNB, Envision, which is the certification scheme for US Act with LEED to have the scheme as well recognized in LEED. As I said, it's independent. It's a balanced certification system, so it's by independent certification institute. You have the certification bodies, the auditors, and then the companies that want to be certified. And a last point to introduce the discussion later on today on the built environment and circularity. And you refer to UNEP and the waste hierarchy, which we are all very familiar with. I've tried here, and we have tried here to go maybe a step further in relation to the built environment and circularity, and to say, well, you have closed loop recycling, you have slowing the resource loop, and then you have really narrowing the resource flows. And somehow everything that you do in the construction value chain will belong to one of those three ways to do it. These are concepts that were developed by the OECD recently. And then you have 5 business models and some example of what can be done in the concrete industry with the use of recycled aggregates, also the use of alternative fuels for cement making, but also using concrete for optimized design solution, design building for disassembly and deconstruction, and then obviously design to last. And there concrete is a key role to play as a durable and recyclable material. And I think that's, as an introduction, ready for the debate. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Now, I do owe an apology to my good friend and colleague in Stockholm, because I sort of jumped the queue. I was so eager to hear from you, Claude, after we'd made the introduction, that I was supposed to turn over to Pekka, who is the coordinator of the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Initiative that operates under the One Planet Network. In the choreography that we'd worked out, he was going to go first. So I think I'd like to turn back to him. I bet he's sending you some sort of evil message about my ability to function. But flexibility is everything at a COP. And so we will turn now back to Pekka, with my apologies for violating the speaking order here.
No worries, Mark, and thanks for the good introduction and good running. How are things going there in Madrid? Have you already got some breakthroughs there?
Well, I have to say that the physical environment here in Madrid is very, very conducive to a good exchange of information. I hope it's carrying over into the negotiations as well. But the facilities, one can only say congratulations to the Spanish government for making available what they did in less than a month's time.
Okay, we would like to make as interactive as possible this session, and therefore I would ask you all to take your smartphones, tablets and laptops and log into slido.com, and there you choose the event that is called 1830, which is the time when we started that. There will be some questions that follow there. So if you can log in, and I will start with the first question, if I can find it from here.
There we go. Pull out your phones and slido.com pound
slido.com and presentation mode. I should have it here. Okay. Right. Right, the first question goes on, what about the more circular economy? Looks like there's some technical issues we have to solve.
But why doesn't it?
I don't know, but the question disappeared. Try to get it again. So the first question to everyone is, a more circular economy could cut emissions from heavy industry by 2050. By how much? What is your guess? There are 4 alternative answers there. It's not only built environment, it's also a bit wider other industries. But what is your bet? The source of information here is the Material Economics 2018, so quite recent study that has been done. So how much can we gain out of circularity, which is one of the core topics we are applying here? There are only 9 answers. You can do it better. I heard that in these sessions that are live streamed, there have been between 3,000 and 5,000 even, let's say, remotely connected, and that should be available for everyone. So slido.com 1830. 17, it's improving, but I think we get at least 50 or something to get a view on that. Okay, but now that you have found the place, this slido.com, you should stay there, because there will be also other questions that follow. But without delaying, while you are a bit still learning the thing, the correct answer is 56%. So more than half of the emissions can be cut already if we apply those circularity principles. And I think that's also a good message for the previous youth presenter from Iceland that was not so optimistic. So there's huge potential when we apply things that we already have in our hands. But without delaying any further, I would introduce our speaker from Stockholm. She's Ninni Westerholm, who's an architect, practicing architect, and she will tell us about her views on circular construction, especially in the Nordic countries. The intention is in this dialogue is to have a bit north-south debate, but her presentation is more maybe focusing on the Nordic countries. The floor is yours, Ninni, for 10 minutes.
Hello, so I'm Ninni Westerholm, and
This one?
that one. Yes. So hello. So I'm an architect and I'm a concerned citizen from Helsinki, Finland. And I was invited to come here and speak to you a bit about circularity in construction, what's wrong with the status quo, and what we could and should do about it. So I will start by saying that our buildings are killing us, but what if they could also save us? At the moment we are in, our buildings stand for almost 40% of all of our CO2 emissions. Additionally, half of all the extracted materials in the world are going into the construction. We are constructing buildings using carbon-intensive materials, and the throwaway culture is very strong also in the construction. Therefore, it is the impact our construction has on climate change is undeniable. We are building buildings with huge carbon footprints because we have gotten used to using carbon-intensive materials, and we are constructing with buildings that are increasing in complexity, both structurally and functionally. And we are constructing buildings that are highly dependent on technology. And all of this complexity comes with a high probability of errors that are also linked with increasing health issues. And all of this complexity also makes the recyclability of these buildings really difficult. So what should we do? We should start to apply the circularity of nature into our construction. We should start building in a resource-smart way and start with renovation always when that is possible, and then go to fill-ins or add-ons. And when these are not solving our problems, then we should build something new. But always when we are building something, we should keep in mind that this building is merely a temporary material storage, where materials can be stored for as long as the building fulfills its purpose, and then they can be released and used, ideally, as parts of other buildings. And this is something that we call design for disassembly. And this cascading use of materials is a very good move for our environment, since it lowers the amount of materials that we have to extract and the energy we need to use. So what if our buildings could do better and they could nurture us? We should go back in history a few steps and start favoring simplicity, because this is reliable. And this is also often the recipe for a healthy building that makes a good home and a good work and a study environment. And then we should favor sustainable construction materials. We should aim for small carbon footprints. Studies of life cycle assessment show that a shift from a typical concrete structure to a timber structure can lower the carbon footprint with up to 85%. So this is a huge impact. Additionally, we should aim for big carbon handprints, which means a positive environmental impact. And here studies show that a shift from a typical concrete to wood, the wood stores up to 5 times more CO2 than the concrete, because wood is actually a carbon negative material. And here we can see the study on what happens if we're building the same building out of different building materials, showing that the overall impact if we build it out of wood, the carbon impact is actually negative. But what if we could do even more than just as little harm as possible? What if our buildings could also nourish us? In my master thesis, I studied closed-loop systems in the Nordic urban context, and I came to the conclusion that if we could recycle our wastewaters, the wastewaters from one inhabitant could be used to produce 1.74 kilos of lettuce each day. This is a lot more than this person could possibly eat. And this urban block of almost 100 residents could be used to produce more than 60,000 kilos of food each year, something that could be that is sold at the local supermarkets for more than €1 million. So after this project, I can't help but wonder, what more could our buildings do for us as a tool to fight climate change? And to get answers to these questions, I want to see innovation, and I want to see research, and I want to see life cycle assessment calculations. And based on this, I want to see laws, and I want to see regulations. And then I want to see huge fines for people who are breaking these rules, because money seems to be a great motivator. And then I want to see feelings, because we are often driven by our emotions. And then I want to see teeth, and I want to see claws, because learning from history, no big change ever went through because somebody just kindly said, please. And what's the global impact, and why do we have to hurry? It seems like we have to build 230 billion square meters in the next 40 years. This means we need to double our building stock in the next 40 years, or build 1 New York City each month for 40 years. And most of this construction is going to happen in the global south. So here we, especially in the Nordic countries, we have the opportunity to set an example for the rest of the world. But the point where we are at, we are living in polluting cities that have proven to be very effective on turning resources into waste and pollution. But we are aware of this problem, and we are shifting towards sustainable cities that are using that should use sustainable resources in systems that are actually feeding back into the city. So if you take a look at the global south, there's already polluting cities, but there's also rival cities that are growing because there's an acute need for housing. And here, I want to point out that we should help these countries instead of them developing to the point where we are at now and repeat our mistakes. We should work together and help them leapfrog to the point where we are heading, and we all have to go if we want to avoid destruction and chaos. Thank you, and please do something.
Thank you very much, Nini. That was very inspiring start from our perspective. We would like to have the next Slido question then. Go here. And now that you heard this presentation, we would like to hear your views on how do you see, what did you find important there? Which were your key takeaways? So like just type in 3 words what you remember of this 10-minute presentation on why buildings are killing us instead of nurturing us, or how it was.
Nurturing or nourishing.
With your hand on mic. In principle, we intend to also collect a lot of questions there through this Slido, but you can pose while people write. Only one person has been able to type one word so far. But the others cannot hear if it's not over mic.
Does this work? Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, great presentation, and it's super interesting what you're doing. I'm just wondering, when you say like store carbon in the houses, do you mean from the wood being grown for the houses, or in any other way? Is there any type of carbon trapping?
When we're talking about wood construction, then it is like the wood material itself stores lots of carbon.
Like the material when it's in the house,
yes,
on its own. Okay.
So we are moving the carbon storage from the forest to the building.
Cool.
And ideally making more space in the forest for a new tree to grow.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thank you.
Well, if I may, on storing carbon, and it's a point I didn't touch upon in my introduction, but concrete reabsorbs carbon over its whole life. So this is called concrete carbonation. So, and there are also now CCU technologies to produce concrete using CO2. So actually there are also other ways that a building can absorb carbon and CO2 over its whole life. So maybe also on polluting cities, there are also some concrete types that can absorb the NOx. There are some concrete now that have this property to depollute the air. So that's also a type of technologies.
So maybe we can come back to this sort of, I would hate to see a pitting of concrete versus wood, because I can imagine as well that depending on your natural resource base, in a particular country, that there are also implications of the movement of materials, around the world. And if you are richer in certain raw materials, and those are economically and environmentally sensible from a life cycle perspective, then those would be favorable. And the opposite could well apply in a different situation. But I think
if I may still, Mark, add one thing.
Put it back to you maybe to interpret some of the Slido responses here. They're very circularity, action, simplicity seem to dominate.
I think we have many good points here to take further, and what Nini said was that we should rather stop talking and do action. How do we implement these principles in our practical life tomorrow? And we would like to have more debate, and for that you could send, using this Slido, your questions to the panelists. And while Mark introduces the other panelists in Madrid, Nini will stay here, Claude will stay there, but there are some other speakers, Mark, you have been able to invite.
Yes, so I'd like to invite to the stage now Oras Tinkanen, who is a senior advisor in the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. And Sitra has, well, I guess you're going to share with us your experience on the approaches of innovation and circularity. The theme today, I've underlined it here, the theme today in the Nordic Pavilion is My Fossil-Free Community. And we'd be interested in your views on the use of building materials and the sort of circularity approaches and how that fits into the theme of today, My Fossil-Free Community.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. The Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, has been working on both climate action and the circular economy and the intersection of these two for quite many years now. So if this is an area of interest to you, I would very much recommend having a look at the Sitra website, where we have a wealth of studies and other types of information. Now, in terms of the importance of building materials and circularity, I think the previous speakers have done a really good job of outlining how important this sector is. I would just perhaps want to point out one thing, which is regarding the change that we will see. If you look at a country like Sweden, which already has a very low carbon energy mix, there, over the course of the lifetime of a building, already about half of the lifetime emissions come from construction materials. And this is the situation we are likely to see in an increasing number of countries as we are successful in decarbonizing our energy system. So the relative role of construction materials will increase over the coming years from the point of view of emissions. And we also know that introducing circular economy measures would help in reducing emissions significantly from the construction sector. So for instance, there was already a reference to the material economic study that was released last year, and it pointed out that in the EU alone, from the production of 4 different materials for construction, that is steel, concrete, aluminium, and plastics, using different circular economy tools, we could reduce the emissions from these materials by more than 200 megatons by 2050. So we are talking about a very large emission reduction potential from construction materials using different circular economy tools. And we already heard about what that could possibly mean for concrete, but there are also possibilities for other materials as well. And we do have some good examples emerging, both on the local level in different companies and in the industries and at the state level. I think the challenge is that to meet the challenges we are facing, we would need to scale up these solutions much, much faster than we are seeing. So currently we are seeing more individual pockets of action and good pilot projects, but we are not seeing these good best case examples scaled up and applied across the board. And that brings to what Ninni was saying about the need for policy and regulation. That is definitely needed for us to achieve impact at scale.
I think scaling up is a common refrain here. One can walk around and get many good examples in here in the various pavilions and the side events, those pockets of change that illuminate the way forward. And the challenge for all of us is how to get the aggregation and more take up more widely in many more places around the world. It is one of the things in this particular area that the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Initiative, again, part of the One Planet Network, focusing on sustainable consumption and production. The members of that group are focusing to an increasing extent on scale. How do we take the good examples and get them propagated more widely and faster? I would like now to invite up to join us here the third panelist in Madrid. I'm looking around. I'm not sure we have, no. Well, to Irfan Tariq, who is the General Director of the Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan, but I don't see him. So I was hoping he was going to arrive, and I looked up and there he would be. But I'm afraid we have one missing in action, Pekka. So that's going to give us more time for the audience discussion and interaction on Slido, because that is actually the part that is often truncated at the end of a good series of presentations. So those of you in the audience, prepare your questions. You can submit them electronically if that is your preference. But we're going to turn over, I think, using the microphone in a moment. So Pekka, I'm going to turn over to you in Stockholm because we can jump ahead a little bit here.
Thanks, Mark and Horace. Irfan would have been very nice to have here. We just discussed with him recently, and he confirmed his participation. Hopefully, he will find his way, because in Pakistan, they are greening their building regulations, precisely what we are talking about. They have a big 5 million housing project starting, and we are a bit assisting them there. But there are a number of questions already arrived over this Slido, and there are a couple of those for Ninni, like when you talk about the regulation, what do you think is the number one thing when promoting circular processes?
I think what the Finnish Ministry of the Environment is actually working on is this taking they are going to start asking for LCA calculations. And I would really hope that it would go to the point that we won't be able to get building permissions for unsustainable buildings, because it seems like this is the only way that we can force sustainability.
And there was another question also when you talked about the circular buildings and nurturing, feeding people. That was very inspirational. Has that been already done somewhere? Do you have any cases?
My whole thesis, which ended up being a book, it's actually based on a Swedish architect's life work from the 70s. He started a concept called nature housing, and there's a bunch of people called greenhouse living that are actually building projects like this in small scale in Sweden.
Thanks. And then there was a question that I think anyone can answer. Firstly, in this SBC program, we are like material neutral. We are not promoting any individual material being, let's say, generally better than the other, always depending on the purpose, the performance required, and the availability. But since these certification and labeling schemes are not so widely spread in the global south also, so what should be done and what would be the way? So anyone who has an answer to this, how to build, because we are going to try to support this sort of development in our program. So please advise us how to establish those responsible sourcing systems in developing countries.
Maybe if I may come into that one, yeah. I think I presented the fact that the scheme is recognized by a building assessment scheme, and the key issue here is voluntary scheme, and then if they are accepted by a building scheme, building assessment scheme, then for sure you would have this responsible sourcing scheme picking up also in emerging economies. So I would really say voluntary schemes and then being recognized by the building assessment schemes, and that would also ensure material neutral assessment and from a whole life perspective, because you would actually assess the material in the building for a certain purpose. So you would really have all the aspects of whole life assessment, a 360-degree assessment, and the scheme would pick up voluntarily.
Thanks. That was a bit the approach we took with Pakistan when first developing those voluntary guidelines that are now hopefully trying to be, let's say, validated in implementation, and then the next step would be to go into regulation. Any other comments to this question?
I have a question, if I may, Pekka, because what we often see in our work is that even when good regulations and good labeling schemes come about, that so much of buildings and construction is in the informal sector, where enforcement or one could look at the growing need to educate people in the construction field so that they are able to analyze and then build better buildings are often stumbling blocks. So how do we get more of the industry educated, and how do we ensure that enforcement of good policies it actually takes place? So these are two things we're searching for, and I'd be interested in any of the panelists sharing their experience, or even people in the audience. And I can see some of those of you who might be wrestling with these issues in your own countries.
Well, there is also a clear role for developers here too, and it's back to the point of making buildings that people feel well at. So there is a role for developers to develop the right type of building, and not only to nurture the people and make sure that the building are fit for purpose, but also to design for future use, to design for the building to be reused first, to last long, to be durable, and then also try to build in the circular economy concept in there. And this is really what I try to present it on the slide here, is that you can slow down the resource loop, so to make sure you don't deconstruct too quickly so that the building is there to last, but that is also built in a flexible way, that you can repurpose it. Actually, that's the example that's on that slide is an apartment building that was refurbished into an office building. So that's exactly an image on how a building can be repurposed afterward. But then also how you can narrow the resource loop, which actually are ways that you can use the product. And I know we want to be material neutral, but I will give an example. You can use the concrete to make the finishes. You can use the concrete to store the energy. You can use concrete as a battery to store the energy. You can also use thermal mass properties. So there are also ways to use the material more efficiently. And so those are all type of ways that you can build more sustainably, but certainly more efficiently from a circular perspective.
While there are still more questions coming, I would like to give also the floor to the audience here in Stockholm. If you have something, please identify yourself, and if it's addressed to one person, just name it, or in general.
Yeah. Jonas Svedin, Stockholm Resilience Center, Stockholm University. Thank you for presentations. There were two words coming, simplicity or simplification, and complexity, complexity less. And also the framing of more developed countries in technology sense, economic sense, and less. So does that with simplification mean the same thing in these two social settings, or are they different? And what is meant by the simplification in those two cases?
I would say that I feel the problem especially in Finland has been that we've started building really complex buildings that rely on the technology to work. And if something goes wrong, suddenly we have like an issue with molded schools, then we have sick people. And then I've understood the issue is that now also when experienced architects from the developed countries are trying to design in developing countries buildings that work on natural ventilation, which is smart, and we are slowly trying to get back to that also in Finland. But then they're usually met with resilience because it's not seen as modern, because they look at what we are doing, and we are having this machinery in our buildings, and suddenly we notice that it comes also with a lot of problems. So this is one of the things that I mean that simplicity might be better. I don't mean that we should have buildings that doesn't use technology, but it shouldn't rely only on machines.
Pekka, I'd like to offer the audience here in Madrid the opportunity to ask some questions as well. We have a microphone. Does anybody have anything you'd like to put to the panelists here in front of you, or to Nini? We have one, Pekka.
Pekka, nice to see you. Peter Boswell from the International Federation of Consulting Engineers.
Hi, Peter.
I mean, hi. We're always worried about costs, of course, and we now have a few case studies of refits of offices buildings, of some apartment buildings, where putting circular economy principles in, you usually have to have some sort of pre-contract agreement, so it's a sort of two-phase design-build process. It works twice, you double the cost, basically, of your sort of design and supervision costs, which for a building traditionally is about 4%. For circular economy, you're well above 10%. So clients are a little bit resistant because of these costs. Secondly, who takes the responsibility, the liability, that you've actually met the regulations of, requirements of what may have to happen in 100 years or 50 years' time. And they try to pass off those liabilities in the contracts to the developer or to the engineer or somebody. So it's this mainstreaming of the procurement to make it more realistic in the context of what we normally do. Any comments?
It's a very real-world example of some of the barriers. Would either of you care to take a crack at that, or colleagues and friends in Stockholm? We also had one other question here, and maybe while we ponder that one, Peter, maybe you can come back with the answer.
a provocative comment without an answer.
All right, good evening. My name is Duru Tawale. I'm from the Gambia. I work with the Environmental Institution. Actually, mine is a contribution, not a question, of an experience. And we have a huge problem with cement in our country. Construction highly depends on sand, and we get this sand from the coastline. So that means we are having increased erosion along the coastline because we are extracting a lot of sand for construction. Now we came up with this, there is a new building material, compressed art block that uses a very small amount of cement. And we learned it from India, by the way. And even though we've managed to sensitize people on this, even tested that it is far more stronger than the normal concrete cement block, we're still finding it hard for people to adopt it. One, for security reasons, two, for durability, and then just obsession with cement. You know, perhaps people have experiences somewhere that we can share, but we are having it difficult to get this thing through, even with the test of its strength being more than the cement block. You know, we still find it hard to get people get into it. That's an experience I understand.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understood everything. In any concrete, there is not that much cement. It's about 10% cement, so that we are not confused here. So cement is just the glue of concrete. And obviously, yes, it requires research to lower further the cement content of concrete, because this is actually what is carbon intensive, is the cement, is not the concrete. So, and indeed, when you develop new products, there is a need to assess durability, longevity, and this kind of issues. On the other comment, I would say, I think that there is no free lunch. If we want to be more durable, that would be my first answer. But I'm surprised of such high cost for concrete building, because usually the concrete would be specified for a really long time. Concrete is specified for 100 years or so. And then if you use, as I said, concrete for the finishes and for the walls, for the ceilings, you wouldn't have any extra cost for refurbishing. So I'm quite surprised of this question, but maybe we can debate further. I can put you in touch with my concrete colleague.
Comments from Stockholm.
Yes, hello, my name is Sven Soiland. I work for Nordic Energy Research. And my questions goes to UNEP, I guess, regarding the very impressive numbers we started off with, 58% reductions. Does that include using of construction material, machinery that is carbon neutral, or is it simply the buildings? And if not, what if you add the machinery? What will the numbers be?
I think it's a very good question, but in this case, I would turn over to Pekka, because I think in his role as the coordinator of the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Initiative, he's more likely to have the answer. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I can promise that we'll find actually the backing for that assertion, but he might know right now.
Actually, Oras was already volunteering to answer to that, and Sitra was behind this, let's say, study on material economics that gave out those numbers. So you may know better the study behind that. I was mainly picking the numbers of the report.
Indeed, in the report, the emission reductions come from the materials production processes themselves. And then the energy use is an additional area of emission reductions. And I think one of the key messages from that report was that even if you were using the most energy efficient processes imaginable, and even if you were using only zero carbon energy, the emissions would be far larger than what can be, allowed under our emission budgets. So that's what brings us to these circular economy measures. So emissions coming from different energy sources, including construction machinery, are an additional issue on top of this. And these figures were only referring to the emission reductions from the materials production processes themselves.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much.
And then there were some questions that are a bit extending from the building scale about the land use, now that we were discussing also the food production and other issues. So the question is how that could be managed, the land use needs with competing priorities, food, reforestation, biofuels, timber for construction, etc. Any views on that? Of course, that may be very country specific, who owns the land and which are the land use policies, but that relates with building new neighborhoods in the global south, as an example.
I mean, I don't have a specific answer, but I think the question does point to why we in UN Environment Program are strong advocates of using the principles of life cycle analysis and really taking a holistic view of an issue and really trying to think through some of the deeper interconnections and the relationships so that you come out with an answer that it doesn't solve one problem while causing another one. Early in my career, I worked on the Montreal Protocol and protection of the stratospheric ozone layer. And I think that is often held up as a very successful environmental treaty, and it is, particularly in terms of stratospheric ozone protection. But in retrospect, we did go down a path that saw the replacement of ozone depleting substances by hydrofluorocarbons, which have no real effect on the ozone layer, but are potent greenhouse gases in many cases. So we traded one problem for another, if you want to be rather direct about it. That will probably earn me some enemies in my own organization. But I think had we the foresight, were we blessed with the foresight to say, well, we want to solve this problem. It's a critical one for the earth and for humans, but we don't want to create another problem while we're doing that. And too often, we find ourselves in that situation, and therefore this life cycle analysis is not going to provide all the answers, but it can help bring that kind of clarity of thinking of, have we looked at the deeper interconnections and really gone back to sort of root issues in many cases.
So maybe we are approaching towards the end of this panel discussion. What about if we just go around the table and each of you say in short sentence which are the action points you intend to take based on this discussion and the information shared here today. If we start like from here, Ninni, how you as a practicing architect, how are you educating the clients, or are you, let's say, raising the level of competence of your co-designers in the design process, or which are the most important action points for you?
Yes, that's definitely one thing we are working on in the firm where I am at now. We are, some of us, I'm one of the people who are constantly getting educated in sustainable solutions, and then I take this knowledge and I take it back to the firm and I speak with the partners and the other people who are meeting the clients. So the point should be that all of us has the knowledge to debate and teach as many people as possible about things concerning sustainability.
And Oras, you are consulting the Finnish government a bit through Sitra on how to become carbon neutral with the help of circularity principles. So which are the concrete action points at your end?
Well, I would like to come back what Ninni was saying earlier about the role of laws and regulations. If we had 100 years, we could rely on markets and technology alone. I think, companies would come up with innovative solutions and they would slowly spread and start gaining prominence. But we don't have the luxury of 100 years. So we have to accelerate the adoption of these sustainable solutions, be it climate solutions or circularity economy solutions. And for that, we need laws and regulation and public procurement and financial measures, all of them put together. And that's what I would advise both for Finland and other countries.
Good. And Claude?
Yeah, I would say for sure, responsible sourcing scheme has a key role to play. But from a GCCA perspective, I would say in terms of action is collaboration across the board, value chain and innovation research. We have actually just launched a research network and life cycle assessment, whole life cycle assessment.
Very good. Then at the end, I think we have a short presentation of the program we are running. The intention is to explain why we organize this thing and how we want to continue. So this One Planet Network consists of 6 programs that are, let's say, mandated to implement SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production, and Like Mark already mentioned in the beginning, the Finnish government has been leading this program since 2015 when we started. The whole instrument will last until 2022. UN Environment and RMIT University from Australia are doing the work together with us. So those countries are marked in green. Those that are marked in blue, they mean our advisory committee members representing governments, industry, academia, civil society, and intergovernmental organizations. And in addition to those, we have the partners that are with whom we are doing the work together. They are marked in yellow. And those round spots that have a letter P like project, these are describing our implementation project. They are all in Global South at present in 8 countries. They're covering different aspects of this sustainable construction. And the events are marked in those. So we are operating globally and try to have a change taking place. The mandate was in SDG 12, also in 17, like we are very actively networked program. We intend to deliver healthy indoor-outdoor conditions, provide local jobs, and also support innovation in cities in mitigating climate change and in adapting to that. And we are mainly focusing on 2 thematic areas. One is this circularity, and the other is affordable, resilient built environment. Those responsible sourced materials was the topic today that we are still working on. And at present, we are developing kind of a global state of play report on circularity globally. We don't know any example of such a thing done before. We have all the regional report drafts from Africa, Asia, Latin America, North America, Oceania, and Europe. And those of you that intend to join World Urban Forum 10 in early February in Abu Dhabi, we intend to share the draft there, and the World Sustainable Built Environment Conference to be held in Gothenburg in June. The launch will take place there. So we see circularity in a way that we are not talking about waste. That is like waste, of course, can be seen as a value, as a material, but this circularity can start in any phase in this life cycle process. And we are also collecting case studies from the north, from the south. We think that is one way of sharing the information about what has been already done, different examples. Then we have interviewed different experts in our network. We have a podcast site. Actually, today we launched the 4 new ones describing these challenges and opportunities in different continents. Our website address is shown here in the bottom, and there are also videos where we explain the next steps. This is just a very quick example of what has been, let's say, found as a key takeaways from different regional reports. So which are the new skills we need and how the digitalization can support us in mainstreaming and scaling up the circularity principles, and how to get this, let's say, life cycle thinking in the processes. But the work is still going on, and our program can be still joined, so there's a link, or you can contact us and we can discuss how we can do it together. I try still to get back to this Slido thing because there are some aspects that are put there, what is going to be, let's say, making the change. But this is more or less from our end. Do you want Mark to conclude from Madrid about your key findings from this 1-hour session?
Well, thank you, Pekka. I mean, we are sitting here in the midst of the early stages of COP25, and everyone here is, I think, dedicated to and searching for the solutions to climate change. You walk around and you hear lots of ideas, what to do about deforestation, how to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas production, what role for iron and steel and some of the more material intensive industries. You know, these are very important, and they apply more or less to some countries. But the interesting thing and the critical thing about buildings and construction is that they are universal. They apply to every country. Every person on the planet has a vested interest in getting the building sector right for reasons of climate protection or health, as we heard from Nini. Buildings matter in a very deep way to all of us. So that makes them in some ways distinct. Food production is probably the other one. So I would just close by thanking you, Claude, thanking Oras, thanking Nini, and thanking you, Pekka, for putting the whole thing together. We all need to do a bit of lobbying, I can see here. How are we going to make the change? And I would thank the audience in Stockholm. And it's late. You could be home enjoying dinner with your families, but you chose to spend your evening with us here in Madrid. There's a lot of competition, and for those of you who are with us, I thank you. And for all those connected, millions undoubtedly who are connected via the internet, we thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure having you with us, and I wish everyone a good night and a good COP.
Keep on lobbying the climate negotiators there in Madrid.
Yeah.